Hello and welcome to episode 147 of Magic Rays of Light, a podcast exploring the world of Apple TV and so much more. I'm your host, Devon Dundee. I'm joined by Sigmund Judge. Sigmund, are you feeling thankful?
I am feeling thankful. Of course, Thanksgiving for those that celebrate it. This time of year, and I'm not too sure if you agree with me on this, there's a part of me that gets a little bit somber on this year, especially the things that didn't necessarily go right, people that have been lost, this kind of thing. But Thanksgiving gives me a chance, as those emotions are starting to come to the forefront, to really kind of take a step back and look at the things that I am thankful for in life, right? And it has been a difficult year this year. I figured we'd take a moment to talk about what we are thankful for, and not from an Apple TV perspective. we could do that, but from a life perspective, I think a lot of what we're going to talk about on this episode, especially with the films that we're going to feature in this episode, are going to make us go back to a lot of these feelings. I'm thankful that, I'm not in the midst of a war, that I live in a civilized society, and that I have the opportunity to just speak and that be legal. And of course, I'm thankful for this podcast, and I'm thankful for the team at Mac Stories for looking after us both. But yeah, this year has been quite tough, but overall, I'm quite thankful.
Yeah, I think it's the perfect time to really take time to be grateful. Like you said, we're heading into the holidays, which can be a mixed time of year for a lot of people. And so I think having a whole day to celebrate the things that we are grateful for and just focus on that is important and beneficial. So I'm glad that we're going to be doing that this week. In terms of things that I'm thankful for, I could spend the rest of our podcast listing them, but I'll try to be brief. Of course, I'm thankful for my family, for my wife and my son. I'm thankful for the technology that we have to capture and relive moments. That's something that I've really gotten into over the past, 15 months since I've become a father. That's been something that has been really meaningful for me. And then, of course, I'm thankful for this podcast, for you as my co-host, and for all of our listeners for the ability to get together every week and talk about this Apple TV world that we're so passionate about and love to dive into. So, very grateful, very blessed, and so glad that we get to do this every week. But moving to this week, we've got some great stuff coming up on this show. We're going to talk about Apple's first episode of Concert for One, the immersive music series starring RAYE this episode. We're going to highlight Bread and Roses, the new Apple original documentary. But we're going to start with last week's streaming release of Steve McQueen's Blitz.
In World War II London, 9-year-old George is evacuated to the countryside by his mother Rita to escape the bombings. Defiant and determined to return to his family, George embarks on an epic, perilous journey back home as Rita searches for him.
What is your name?
George.
So how the hell did you end up here?
My mum sent me away.
She did it to keep you safe.
Your son did not arrive at his destination.
I'll be back when I found my boy.
This is for all the parents whose children have been evacuated, and for my boy, George.
Directed by Steve McQueen and starring Saoirse Ronan, Elliot Heffernan, Harris Dickinson, Erin Kellyman, Stephen Graham, Paul Weller, and the great Kathy Burke, with cinematography from Yorick Lasso and music from another great in Hans Zimmer. Devon, I had the opportunity to see this a little while back, and we got to talk about it from my perspective. With its streaming release just last week, you've had a chance of seeing Blitz, and, what did you think?
Well, I loved it, Sigmund. I really enjoyed it. Of course, it came highly recommended from you, so knowing your taste and, putting so much stock into what you think about films, I went in expecting it to be really good, and it was. It's a different take on an aspect of World War II that I wasn't familiar with. This is a genre, a time period that we've seen so many films and shows about, and rightfully so. It's a very interesting period of history with lots of important stories to tell. But this was a perspective I hadn't seen before, and one that I really appreciated. And something you talked about in your review is seeing this from the point of view of a young black boy in London during the Blitz. You know, the Blitz even is a subject I'm not super familiar with. I know it's one that a lot of people are more knowledgeable about, but still getting that on the ground perspective from a young boy on his own going through the city during this time, I thought that was really, really great and something unique. I instantly connected with George and Rita through the portrayal of their love for one another, which is not exactly where the film begins, but I think it's the second scene where we see them just playing a game, talking with one another, making a wish. It's very, very sweet, but you instantly get a feel for the relationship that they have, for the fondness that they have for one another, and for the bond that's been forged between mother and son through everything that they've been through, and that continues to be forged even more so throughout this harrowing experience that they have with the Blitz. But their love is shown in front of the backdrop of the destruction, the terror, and the danger of the Blitz that was afflicting their community, and that sets up this treacherous journey that George goes on. So it's kind of that contrast between their relationship and the horrific atrocities that are happening just outside their door. And you get that from the very beginning, and throughout the film, I'd say that's the contrast that I saw the most, was that love between the mother and son contrasted with the hate and the terror that was happening all around them.
Definitely a harrowing journey, right? And there's lots that I want to dig into with regard to the portrayal of race in London during that time, and some of the comments that you probably wouldn't see on a Mastodon or a Blue Sky or a Threads that I have been seeing on X, accusing the film of blackwashing British history is what I've read, which is ridiculous. But kind of moving away from that for a moment, as someone with less of a personal connection to London and the history as well, something that, I'm born and raised in London, but my memories of the war are non-existent. They are through the stories that have been told by family members that have passed their memories down. How did this portrayal of the Blitz strike you from the other side of the Atlantic?
Well, I have to say, I think the portrayal was very powerful, and there's no way to understand exactly how people living during that time felt. It's such a unique experience. Even you having heard the stories and seen the looks on the faces, that's a one kind of layer removed from the actual experience. And I'm even further removed because I don't even have that experience of hearing the story firsthand. So you can't communicate it exactly, but I think what this film tries to do is get across that menacing, foreboding feeling of being under constant attack. And I feel like the film does a very good job of making the viewer get some kind of glimpse of that sense. And, I'm sitting in my living room, my life's not in danger, but through the structure, I think, and some of the decisions that are made, you just get this idea that these bombs, even though they're only coming at night, they're constantly hanging over these people's minds and weighing on them. And it's a reality that they take with them throughout the day. And so there's this repeated shot of the bombs falling from the sky, getting closer and closer to the ground every night. But before they actually hit the ground, usually that leads into a flashback of life before the Blitz. And so it's this really interesting structure. Each night, as the day goes on, you know that you're getting to a point where, well, the bombs are going to fall again, which is exactly what the people living during this time knew. It was, you could set your clock by these night bombings that were taking place, but you don't necessarily see the bombs hitting the ground. You see them coming down, and then it takes you back in time, and then you're back in during the day with these people. And it's such an interesting structure. You see the aftermath, but you don't actually see the destruction itself until towards the end of the movie. And it kind of gave me sense of the structure of a monster film, where you never quite see the monster until towards the end, which is a really interesting thing to apply to a movie like this one, where they're constantly giving you glimpses of what's happening, but until George is actually seeing it firsthand and you see it through his eyes, you don't actually see the bombs hitting the ground. You just see the destruction afterwards. And I thought that was really, really effective. It gives you a sense of the dread each night, but then that feeling of waking up the next morning to see what's standing, and then the willpower of the people to go on because life had to go on, right? And I think the structure of the film portrays that in such a way that, again, I'm not going to say that I know how those people felt because I never could, but it gives you at least something to relate to on that level of having that experience of knowing what's coming and then waking up the next day and having to just go back out and do it again, which I thought was really incredible.
There's also, and I love the analogy of, comparing this to a monster movie, right? Because one of the clear kind of assets of monster movies is the set design, and the set design on display in this and the set pieces are just out of this world. Now, for the most part, we see the Blitz through the eyes of young George and his mother Rita, really centered on this emotional story between a son trying to make his way back to his mother. And a lot of that journey takes place across London. From both George and mother Rita, their perspectives, what stood out to you about their journeys in this particular storyline?
Well, I love the way the relationship was established at the beginning. I really just instantly you believe in this relationship and you're rooting for it, right? Which I think is what the film's going for. And it gives you this concrete kind of connection to the story and what's happening. This is not something that's happening to just people you don't know or have no connection with. It's this concrete pair of people who are going through this and you're on the journey with them, which I think is amazing. For George, he's a young boy who struggled with his identity his whole life, and you get flashbacks of that. We see him struggling with his identity throughout the journey itself, and on the train with the kids who are giving him a hard time, and different things that are said to him throughout his trek and the way people treat him differently because of the color of his skin. And I think that's kind of part of what you're alluding to with the reaction to this film. But I think it does a good job of showing how he struggled with this throughout his life and how actually this journey that he goes on helps him kind of work through some of that in a certain way. It doesn't fix racism in, the 1940s, obviously, but at least for his personal journey, it was really cool to me to see where he starts at the beginning of the Blitz and then kind of getting the context, but also seeing how his journey throughout the Blitz helps him wrestle with that. He's also always had his mother as the foundation for him to lean on. His father's not in the picture due to circumstances beyond his control. So his mother, you can tell that relationship really is grounding for him. And so as the film begins, his foundation is shaky because literally the ground underneath him is shaking from the bombs that are dropping. And then the foundation that he even has there is taken away from him because he's separated from his mother. She tries to send him off to safety. That's kind of what the government is trying to do to keep these kids out of the cities where the bombs are falling. And so she makes the decision to send him away, thinking that's what's best for him. But very quickly we see that George has other plans, and he tries to go along. He does, but he quickly realizes that this is not the path for him. So he takes things in his own hands and gets back, or decides to try to get back at least, to the one place that he feels safe. And so I'm so impressed with the things that George was able to do throughout this film. Nothing that was unbelievable necessarily that a young boy could pull off, but I know I personally, if you'd have dropped me off in the countryside outside London at that age, I probably would have curled up into a ball and just waited for someone to find me. There's no way I would have made my way home on my own. And so I'm so impressed with him as a character, the skills that he has, but also the drive and the bravery that he shows. Really just so impressive. And of course, he runs into some serious trouble along the way. It seems like each time he's able to escape someone who means him harm, he runs into someone else who means him harm, and people who claim they're going to help him, and he hesitantly trusts them and then ends up in a bad situation. But he's able to move past that in ways that I think really cool to see and impressive.
I almost felt it was the other way. There's this sense of loss throughout the film. This journey is quite perilous. But yeah, we do get to a point where he thinks he's made a friend, and that friend ends up turning him into this group of villains.
Yeah, he becomes like an unwitting looter. Like he doesn't want to do this, but he's small enough to get into these very dangerous, half fallen down buildings and steal from them, which, that whole sequence made me sick to my stomach. But you're right, it was more of a mixed bag. He ran into some people who did try to help him. And I'll have to say, my favorite sequence of the whole film, I think, like you, is the sequence with Ife, the police officer who takes him to safety and promises to take him home and has every intention of fulfilling that promise, and unfortunately is unable to. So it's a roller coaster journey for sure, but I think just seeing him go through that and being on that journey with him, it was really satisfying. And in a way, George, he represents the people that he comes from. He's got that bravery and that boldness and that persistence to carry on no matter what comes his way, which I think is incredible. And then there's Rita, his mother, who, again, shows her strength in so many ways, even before the Blitz begins, just caring for George on her own, persisting through being a single mother. She does have the help of her father, but he doesn't have her partner, George's father, around. So just so much respect for her in that sense and the relationship that they're able to forge. But then we see her, she's working through the Blitz as so many women did, and, supporting the efforts in that way. She's standing up for the rights of citizens. There's this kind of subplot where the powers that be don't want to open up the underground for people to shelter in. You see some pushback there that Rita is a part of. That's cool to see. And she's even taking care of other people in the shelter as well. So just a character with so much strength and so much to admire, I think. I can't help but be inspired by the way that she drops everything the second she finds out that her son is missing and just totally focuses on finding him, which, again, I just think it shows everything that she's been through, including, of course, the Blitz, which is just the backdrop of everything. She persists and she doesn't give up. And her care for her son is what motivates her above everything, which I think, again, is just so respectable and so good to see. Which I think leads us to the end of their journey as the film is concluding, and we do get to see finally George make his way home, but it's just after tragedy has struck his family. He gets home, he gets back to his neighborhood, but he finds that the night before it's been bombed. But despite the horror that they face, George and Rita are reunited, and that's the resolution of the whole thing. It doesn't tie up everything in a nice bow. Even when the film ends, we're still in the middle of the Blitz, right? That's still happening. But they're back together, and that's what really matters.
I thought the casting for Paul Weller, it definitely raised eyebrows for the grandfather when I first saw it. I thought it was brilliantly casted. Of course, Paul Weller, a famous musician, and he has a musical element to his character here, where he's very quiet and very calming, and he uses music in a way to heal George and his daughter Rita. And there's a really interesting costuming element here, where for, I'd say, 3/4 of the film, he's wearing this white striped shirt. And at a point where George needs saving, he's pulled out of this water from one arm, wearing the same shirt of his grandfather.
Oh, wow.
So it's almost his grandfather saving him and allowing him to live. And I just thought it was so subtle, and you may have missed it the first time you saw it, but seeing it on a big screen, it really called to me in a big way, and it was just such a subtle choice, but such a powerful image.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I did not catch that, so I appreciate you pointing it out, and I definitely need to rewatch that scene in light of that. But there's something about maybe George's love for his family and their love for him protecting him throughout this journey in a way that maybe we don't even necessarily understand, but at the very least, it gave him the drive to fight and to continue to pull out of that water, and everything else that he went through to fight through. It's that love of his family that was powering him. So yeah, that's really, really powerful. So George does make it home. He finds this tragedy has taken place, but then he turns, and who else would be there but his mother, Rita? And after everything that they've been through, after looking for one another, after everything they've survived, they're back together again. And that is the resolution of this film. You know, it doesn't solve every problem. They're still in the middle of the Blitz. There's still a world war going on, and they've now lost their home, but they're back together. And that reunion, I think, was so beautiful to see. And to me, these two just serve as a microcosm of the strength and the steadiness of those who weathered the storm that was the Blitz. You know, we're focusing on these two characters, but they're representing their community, the city that carried through such an awful experience, who stayed strong, who got up every morning and continued on with life and persisted through this tragedy that was taking place. And so for me, I came away inspired by this film and just in awe again of those who have come before us, the real people who are represented by this film, the real Ritas and the Georges and everyone else who actually did live through this. It gave me an invigorated sense of the human spirit and a desire to, as they say, carry on myself in the midst of difficult circumstances. So it was a journey that I was so happy to get to go on with George and Rita. Beautiful characters portrayed so well, but just in the grander sense, I came away inspired by their story, but even more so the real people that they represent, and the fact that if the human spirit can endure something like that, then I can carry on as well.
Blitz, now streaming on Apple TV Plus, screening still in some cinemas across London and the UK, maybe in the States as well. For the detractors, I've got one sentence for you. You're all mouth and no trousers.
Yes. So. I love it. That was the first film that we wanted to highlight this week, but we also have another film that we want to talk about. It's covering a more recent event in our world, but one that's just as important and certainly needs to be told. And so we're thankful that we get to talk about Bread and Roses this week. In the wake of the Taliban's return to power, a group of Kabul women lead a revolutionary fight for their rights and their lives.
سنار طالبا گفتن که در خانه باشن و اگر اعتراض میکنه و صدای خدا بیان میکنه تسکیر میشه و ما نباید خاموش باشیم.
مجبوریم مبارزه کنیم دیگه کدام راهی نداره. حالا از جان خود گذشتیم، سر ما فدای وطن و هموطنه.
This film was directed by Sara Mani, produced by Malala Yousafzai, Jennifer Lawrence, and Justine Shirochi. I saw the trailer for this one, very powerful trailer, a feature documentary I haven't yet had the opportunity to see. But Sigmund, what can you tell us about Bread and Roses?
Well, first off, let me just say this is as powerful as the previous film that we talked about, but from a completely different kind of setting and a different production point. This begins on August 15th, 2021, as the Taliban march towards Afghanistan's capital, Kabul, following a 20-year occupancy from the United States, which ended during President Biden's administration in all-round controversial circumstances, including weapons, ammunition and vehicles being left, further emboldening the classified terrorist group as they reverse the progress made through years in just days. That progress is squandered by what can only be deemed as a cruel and depraved misinterpretation of faith, which meant that simple things women take for granted in civilized society were once again outlawed. Women could no longer get an education or work. They couldn't leave their homes without a chaperone. They couldn't play music or sing. They couldn't go to the hospital to give birth because that fate is left to Allah. And they couldn't go to the shops and buy food. And I say couldn't, Devon, What I mean to say is can't, because this disgusting indignity continues today. This is why this amazing film, shot over many months by 3 incredibly brave women in Afghanistan's capital, is something of a miracle in itself. As you can imagine, filming a documentary was also made illegal because it would lift a veil and show the irreprehensible cruelness that the regime dictates, resulting in what can only really be described as a gender apartheid. This is shot on camera phones in a guerrilla style by 3 incredibly brave Afghanistani women, Dr. Zara Mohammadi, Taranum Sayedi, and Sharifa Mahafizadeh. We see the Taliban through the eyes of female activists fighting for simple dignities with chants including bread, work, and education. You know, the real fundamental basics of life. Journalists we see that dare to cover the protests are set upon by Taliban troops and the Islamic Emirate. The protesters themselves are sprayed with tear gas, and the cruelty continues. But what may be seen as a simple scene where women are together eating and planning their next protest and catchphrases on their placards is actually a big and powerful win in this environment. Sarah Mohammadi is a dentist whose practice isn't targeted at the beginning of the film, but is forced to remove her name from the practice and soon operates in secrecy during the day, with her office converting into a place where women can organise at night. Taranum Sayedi is a former government employee who finds herself unemployed due to the Taliban's rule, and soon seeks refuge in nearby Pakistan, where women hide in safe houses, with these safe houses consisting of many rooms, but with up to 10 in a single room. And then you have Sharifa, who practices her activism against the disapproval of her family and this overarching fear that takes hold of not only the women, but the men and the children. And yet there's a defiance and spirit here that is all-consuming and actually overpowers the fear. I watched these women over an hour and a half, and I wasn't fearful for them, I was angry for them. But also my heart broke as I watched this. There are surreal moments here where there's discussion of a marriage being revoked because the woman was working before the takeover, and one of the women secretly recording their father sharing his disapproval of their protests, and that he can't show his face in public for fear of repercussions. But that fear he's experiencing is nothing like that of what the women activists endure today, with examples captured on film of activist Taranum having her door beat down before being taken away for punishment. She's actually still in Afghanistan right now, and she's been silenced following that. In a similar incident, Mohammadi, the doctor, one of the central focuses of this documentary, is also taken away, and when she returns, she recounts that a fellow activist was beaten so badly that she didn't recognise her at first when she approached her for a hug. There's also one such activist who lives with Taliban members who she's out protesting during the day, and when she comes home, she's beaten and abused at night. That means that some activists also sleep at different spots each night in fear of being targeted and taken away. And some activists, unfortunately, just disappear, never to be seen again.
That is very tough stuff. I have to imagine difficult to watch, but even more so, of course, difficult to be living in the midst of and trying to capture and speak out at the same time, which is incredible work that they're doing, but it all sounds very harrowing to me, Sigmund. Am I right in saying that? Is there hope found in this documentary as well?
I think there is a better understanding. I think that's what this offers, is a better understanding. I remember when Malala Yousafzai, who's a producer of this, was shot right in the head by the Taliban in Pakistan when she was protesting for education for women. And that's where her rise to prominence came from, right? And we saw lots of speeches and lots of applaud, but overall, not a lot has changed in that time, especially after the US and UK and other troops from all over removed themselves from Afghanistan and the Taliban came back to rule. But again, what this documentary gives is a better understanding of the circumstances, firstly, of how good we, and most importantly, the women in our lives have it in what I'd call mostly civilized societies. And I think it will open up the eyes of those who are ignorant to the situation that has caused such an influx of immigration. The idea of having no choice but to leave your home, your family, your accomplishments, your memories, because you've been forced into vagrancy and poverty, is one that will get through to, I think, even the most absurdly ignorant. We all know someone that doesn't quite get it. The positive moments here, though, Devon, are where you hear children, women and men chanting together in secret from their apartments in unison. And amid gunfire in the distance at night, women are using spray cans to show their defiance, spraying tags such as "Freedom is every woman's birthright." But there's one scene in this documentary that will stay with me and anyone, I think, that cares about the next generation. Angry young girls, no more than 10, profoundly saying to the camera, "I want the Taliban out of our country. I wish this was just a bad dream, and that one day we'd wake up and see our own flags and our own police in the streets." That's the quote from one of a few young girls who are having their education stripped away from them, now training quietly in the living room and prepped for protest, as the young boy in the family, dressed as one of the Taliban, points his fake gun at them and pretends to spray tear gas at them. There's hope, and the fight for freedom, I think, will outlast these wicked ideas from a dictatorship that surely can't outlast such spirit. And that's really what stayed with me throughout this documentary. What I will say, though, Devon, is, and I get a lot of people will probably be listening to this going, well, this just sounds harrowing and not like something I want to go out of my way to watch. I think it's everyone's duty to do so. My biggest cry would be that you see this film, and once you've seen it, you talk about it, you share it with others, and you bring further eyes and understanding to this situation, because it is absolutely unfathomable to think that something like this could still be going on in 2024, let alone 2025 and further. And I hope, with more people talking, that there'll be more action from the United Nations and other people as well.
I think that's a good spot to end the discussion. Watching stories like this, it can make you feel hopeless and sad for the state of the world. But as you said, what we can do is inform ourselves and inform others and do what we can to, let it be known to those in power that we want to see these situations addressed and changed to the extent that we're able to. And of course, as always, our thoughts and prayers go out to the many, many people around the world who are affected by such situations and are finding themselves in these tragic scenarios that we all need to be informed about. Bread and Roses is streaming now on Apple TV Plus, and we recommend that you check it out. It's going to be a little bit of a tough transition, Sigmund, coming from such serious and heavy topics, but we do have a lot happening in the world of Apple TV news that we need to get to, starting with some details revealed by Mark Gurman this week. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah, so this weekend, Mark noted a few interesting tidbits regarding the television project's history. why it eventually made way for Apple Vision Pro, and that the original concept was that of a touchscreen computing device that also acted as a display for entertainment. No surprise, I don't think, to us, as we called it when iMacs were designated under some circumstances to the kitchen when the M1 iMac was reintroduced in 2022. But Gurman also went on to say that Apple's focus should be on a cheaper stick, despite reporting at the beginning of September that any such plans were killed off internally, as the device was looked upon as cheapening the Apple brand, especially with the TV app already on third-party devices. So a little bit of punditry there, as well as insider information from Mark. I think the stick is something that he sees use for. There is a part in his write-up that talks about the history, but also talks about the idea of maybe having 3 tiers of Apple TV product: the stick, the Apple TV we know today, and another one, and I can't imagine where he may have picked this up from, because it's been something we've been talking about for a long, long time. An Apple TV Pro, or as he designated the name, an Apple TV Max.
Well, as you pointed out to me privately as we were preparing for this episode, Sigmund, I don't think Apple's going to use the word Max for a TV product. I feel like that would cause some confusion and maybe some lawsuits even. So we don't want that. But yeah, it's cool to see Mark Gurman coming out in favor of the Apple TV Pro, something that you and I have talked about quite a bit, getting higher end hardware in there for, even better video and sound experiences. And of course, gaming is the other big benefit that would happen there. I personally was not super compelled by the stick argument. I've gone back and forth on this before, but I feel like with the direction that Apple has taken the Apple TV, they're almost perfectly positioned now with the product. I feel like if they could get it to double digits pricing, $99, that would be like, there wouldn't be any need to go lower than that, especially for the functionality that's being offered in a world where smart TVs are so common. I don't feel like the stick is something that absolutely needs to be in the lineup, but I do feel like if they could get the Apple TV price down slightly, then it would fill that role and offer that premium experience at a price that would be, something about moving down below 3 digits. It just unlocks things in people's brains. I think that it just makes it feel more affordable, and it would also be really premium as well. I did really enjoy, though, the details, the historical context for the Apple TV. I thought that was all great, and the way Mark talks about the margins on TV products, actual TV sets, and the fact that Apple has repeatedly looked at this as an idea and repeatedly said it doesn't make financial sense for us. And so why would it change now when the margins on TVs are as low as they've ever been,
But my argument against that would be, but Apple sell the Studio Display. They sell the Pro XDR. What's the difference?
Yeah. I don't know as much about the computer monitor market, but I agree with you. I think, Apple would sell it in such a way that they get margins that would make it worth it to them. But what's really changed beyond just the price of components and assembly and shipping and, that all doesn't seem to have changed too terribly much. But what has changed is Apple's strategy, and especially this desire that the company seems to have to enter the home market and really get aggressive there, to not only, get hardware sales, but even more so to get people locked into the services and then have that ongoing recurring revenue, which is really where the company's growth is. So I think that's what's really changed. Mark mentions that as a factor that could be influencing the company to be thinking about this again, and that could be enough to tip the scales in favor of the display. The other thing Mark mentioned that I thought was really interesting was the quote from Steve Jobs. I think it was one of his very last interviews, where he said that he had cracked the TV. And I had never knew exactly what that meant. We didn't know if that was the Apple TV 4K and tvOS that eventually came. But it sounds like what he was really talking about was the software, was the operating system and the TV app especially that experience is what Steve Jobs meant when he said he cracked it, which I'd never heard anyone say before definitively that that's what Steve Jobs meant, but that makes a lot of sense to me. So I don't know that this has super changed our thoughts or opinions on things, but it's even more credence to why Apple could be considering the TV set. And of course, one more member of the Apple TV Pro team, which we're always accepting new memberships if anyone else wants to sign up.
Yeah, I think the introduction of this new Mac Mini has got people thinking in terms of, wow, that could have acted as a great home theatre console with all of that power. And obviously Apple still trying to break into gaming from a conventional gaming point of view. Of course, you know, mobile gaming going gangbusters. Two asides from this conversation that I noted on social media this week. Love to Dream, who's someone we haven't mentioned on this podcast for a long, long time, who's kind of a prolific leaker at one point. Now, puts out a few tidbits, but of course he has different resources that we don't. And he was able to take apart the new Mac Mini and have the shell anodized and turn black to look like an Apple TV. I shared some photos with you. We'll share the link in the show notes. They just made me want this mythical Apple TV Pro even more.
Oh, it looks so good. I think it is darker than what Apple used to call the space gray Mac Mini. I guess maybe it's more like a space black is what they were going for, which, yeah, now I wish the Mac Mini was available in that finish. But even more so, like you said, if they're saving it for a future Apple TV enclosure, then that would be even sweeter. But yeah, this casing, it just looks so good in general, but then you just add that black tint to it, and yeah, I want one. If Love to Dream wants to start selling, secondhand anodized Mac Minis, they probably can't guarantee, the warranty and the hardware and all that, but it really does look awesome and would probably sell quite well.
Just sell me the shell. I feel like I'm ready after the Apple TV Go. I'm ready for the Apple TV Pro.
There you go.
Also on social media this week, kind of talking about the future of television and what Apple could possibly bring in the future. Friend of the show, Adam Bader, who also happens to be the director of product at Warner Brothers Discovery, said this on X this week: a futuristic Apple TV set should be a 4K resolution projector that works with eye and hand tracking, basically a Apple Vision Pro viewing experience without a headset on your face. The user should be able to use it in any room, resize the screen size, and navigate without a remote. I replied to this saying I hope to see it in my lifetime, and I'll do everything in my power to make sure I'm there for it. And then we started discussing hand gestures and how sign language and gestures should be something that come in the upcoming home devices that we've been talking about over the last couple of weeks. He agreed, and I actually don't think we're too far away from this, because there are TVs out there right now that are in production that look unconventional. They're like a mini stage with about 2 foot ahead of where the screen would be, and it projects up, and you get this 3D projection that's got like a 3-dimensionality to it, which I guess you can also look down on, look around, very much like what we saw in Star Wars and the projections that go on there. And I think, as we spoke about last week, I think Apple, if they're going to make something like this in the future, they have to make a conventional TV first to give people reason to choose Apple as their display type and choose that Apple TV experience. But yeah, that's what I think will eventually happen. I think it will actually happen sooner rather than later. Who knows? Maybe Adam Bader has some inside knowledge that we just don't.
Well, I think the building blocks are definitely there, and we're seeing hand gestures and gestures in general becoming more and more a part of how we interact with our Apple devices. And I've tried many times just out of habit to interact with tvOS with hand gestures and eye gestures. And so, yeah, I think that would be a really great addition. And it seems like, something that would be feasible within the not too distant future with what Apple's working on now. It's just a matter of prioritization and finally making that call that, yes, we're going to make it. So fingers crossed. While we may have to wait for that future Apple TV set to come to fruition, there is a preview that's now available to all, or at least if someone will jump off the now full test flight and maybe give us a couple spaces. Of course, we're talking about Plex, which has released a public preview of its completely rewritten and redesigned iPhone app with revamped navigation and more emphasis on artwork throughout. Media libraries have been consolidated into a single tab, and the watch list has been promoted to the top navigation, a change that I think a lot of people will be excited about. This new look will roll out to all users next year, but a test flight is available for users to try now. We'll leave a link in the show notes, but you'll probably find what we found, and that's that the spots are full, and we'll have to wait for them to open up more spots or see what happens. But I think it's cool, this concept of they've got this rewritten app. It's supposed to have a better technical foundation in terms of adding features across platforms in the future, which is a lot of work that users don't always see at first, but has dividends throughout. But to give people a preview of this reworked app and get that feedback before they actually give it to everyone, I think that's really cool. And Plex is an exciting place to be right now.
Yeah, it's a great app. So is Infuse. Spoke about that over the weekend. Been trying different things, DTS audio, and actually some of the better playback options on Infuse. I actually have Plex running to Infuse after paying for a lifetime membership of both apps. I've kind of settled for now on Infuse, but I'm really looking forward to checking out what the future holds for Plex. Surprising to nobody, neither of those apps made it onto Apple's finalist list for this year's App Store Awards, but we do have the list for this year's contenders. And whilst it's short, it's varied to a degree I wasn't expecting.
Yeah, the 3 finalists for Apple TV App of the Year are Dropout, F1 TV, and Zoom. 3 very different apps, but all well-deserved award contenders in their own rights. It's funny that Dropout is so front and center at Apple right now because it's an app that I know you recently discovered and recommended just a couple weeks ago on this very show, one of their shows, which is very cool. F1, of course, very much in the zeitgeist right now when it comes to, there's a lot of overlap between Apple fans and F1 fans. So that one's great. And then Zoom, with everything that's been happening with tvOS and video conferencing, and this year with permanent cameras, what a better time for Zoom to be nominated as well as one of the apps that's really invested in tvOS and the new features. So yeah, I think this is a great short list. Congratulations to all 3. We don't know when Apple will actually announce the winners. They've just said in the coming weeks, but definitely check out the full list of nominees for all the categories. There's 12 categories, tons and tons of awesome apps to check out. And of course, we'll link in the show notes to the full list.
Shall we talk about some Apple original news, Devon?
I think we shall. We got one trailer this week. It's for Wonder Pets in the City coming December 13th. An exciting return for that series coming actually over from Nickelodeon to Apple TV+. So interesting little tidbit there and one to look out for. We'll link that trailer in the show notes. But we have 3 other big pieces of release news that we really have to discuss, starting with one that we've kind of been checking our watches, checking our calendars, thinking, when is this coming? And it's finally been announced that Fly Me to the Moon will stream December 6th on Apple TV+. It's quite a lengthy break between its theatrical release and streaming, right?
It is, and I don't think either of us thought it was going to take this long because of how the normal rollout has been. But actually, it kind of makes sense. Rewatching this week on PVOD, I noted that the beginning of the film, at least, is set around Christmas. Who knew? So it was there all along. The clue was there. Very much looking forward to revisiting this over the holidays. Fly Me to the Moon, of course, December 6th on Apple TV+.
And officially a Christmas movie.
Officially a Christmas movie for all you diehards out there. Talking of something a little more diehard, Dope Thief will debut Friday, March 14th on Apple TV+. The crime drama comes from creator Peter Craig, executive producer and director Ridley Scott, and executive producer and star Brian Tyree Henry. It's based on the Dennis Tafeya book of the same name, follows longtime Philly friends and delinquents who pose as DEA agents to rob an unknown house in the countryside, only to have their small-time grift become a life and death enterprise as they unwittingly reveal and unravel the biggest hidden narcotics corridor on the eastern seaboard. We'll of course leave a link to a first look in the show notes, but first off, really happy to see Brian Tyree Henry back on an Apple original. I believe his first appearance was on Causeway alongside Jennifer Lawrence. A fantastic film that if you haven't checked out, you should. It's definitely a sleeper on the service. And the return of Ridley Scott, whose Scott-free production company, of course, has an overall deal with Apple. So that's all very cool. What are your thoughts?
I'm very excited for this one. We talk about it all the time, but early 2025 for Apple TV Plus just looks absolutely stacked. Throwing Brian Tyree Henry and Ridley Scott in the mix is just, it's just going to be awesome. So I'm very excited for this one. But that's not all we've got coming in the spring, because Your Friends and Neighbors, starring John Hamm, another returning star to Apple TV Plus, will premiere globally April 11th on the service. And the company has already renewed the series for a second season, with hopes to begin production in the spring. I think we heard through the rumor mill that the show was definitely coming back for a season 2, but it's always good to hear it from Apple themselves, and it's cool that this news is coming alongside the date announcement for the first season, so everyone going into season 1 can know that there's a lot of healthy future ahead for this series. From creator Jonathan Tropper, the drama follows Andrew Coop Cooper, a disgraced former hedge fund manager still grappling with his recent divorce, who resorts to stealing from the homes of his neighbors in the exceedingly affluent Westmont village, only to discover that the secrets and affairs hidden behind those wealthy facades might be more dangerous than he ever imagined. A first look at the series is linked in the show notes. It sounds like another instance, just like Dope Thief, where someone tries to run a small-time grift and then gets in way over their head, which I'm very excited to see this one as well, starring John Hamm. Also, coming a little later in the future, currently filming, is The Last Thing He Told Me, Season 2, which has begun. And in development, we talk about like the surefire second season when it comes to TV. That doesn't necessarily translate when it comes to film. This week, the sequel to Apple original film Wolves has been noted that it is no longer in the works. Speaking originally with Collider, director John Watts said, "I don't know what I'm directing next, and I don't think there's going to be a Wolf sequel." He then later elaborated the following day when speaking with Deadline as he promoted a new Star Wars series on Disney+, saying, "I showed Apple my final cut of Wolves early this year. They were extremely enthusiastic about it and immediately commissioned me to start writing a sequel. But their last-minute shift from a promised wide theatrical release to a streaming release was a total surprise and made without any explanation or discussion. I wasn't even told about it until less than a week before they announced it to the world. I was completely shocked and asked them to please not include the news that I was writing a sequel."
They ignored my request and announced it in their press release anyway, seemingly to create a positive spin to their streaming pivot. And so I quietly returned the money they gave me for the sequel. I didn't want to talk about it because I was proud of the film and didn't want to generate any unnecessary negative press. I loved working with Brad and George and Amy and Austin and Purna and Zlatko and would happily do it again, but the truth is that Apple didn't cancel the Wolf sequel. I did, because I no longer trusted them as a creative partner. Pretty scathing. You were right, Devon, all along.
I did not want to be right. Reading this quote, it's a long quote, but we wanted to share it all because I think the details are important here in understanding what's happening with the Wolf sequel and what happened with Wolves as well. When Apple made the announcement that they were going to be pivoting Wolves away from theaters and into streaming, they also included the detail that, oh, by the way, there's a sequel coming. And that immediately struck me as a red flag. Mm-hmm. It struck me as the typical Apple PR spin, which, I understand wanting to keep things positive. Apple has a brand and an image to continue to maintain. And it's actually impressive the way they've continued to do that while branching out into different things like the theatrical film world. I mean, honestly, it's impressive how cohesive the company is. But in this case, I feel like that attribute of the company's personality won out over creative authenticity and collaboration in a way that just really, at least the way John Watts tells it, which I don't really have any reason not to believe him, it really strikes me the wrong way as well. It played out pretty typically from what we can tell at the beginning. They saw the film, they liked it, they wanted to release it and make a second one. That all makes a lot of sense. But when you start changing the fundamentals of your deal with someone, the very foundation of your working relationship, then you've got to put the brakes on. You can't keep pressing forward in this one area while completely changing up another area and just kind of leaving people completely discombobulated. And so disappointing. John Watts, obviously a director I have a lot of respect for. He did an excellent job with Wolves. I mean, such a great film. We were excited to see what came next. And a great creative partner for Apple from everything that we could tell. And it's unfortunate things turned out this way. I think anyone involved in the situation, hopefully if you ask them now, they would say they wish things had gone differently, but what's done is done. And it sounds like Wolves is not going to be moving forward, at least not with John Watts anyway.
This week I was listening to Jason Snell over at Upgrade and Mike Hurley, our friends over there. And they compared like TV shows to a novel and films to short stories, and that there's more of an appetite for these novels these days, and kind of questioned where film is now. And I think the business has to pivot because fewer people are going to the cinema now than ever before. The theatrical experience is still quite a costly endeavour, and whilst it acts as a great promotional tool for your streaming service, there's still an audience that wants to see the films on the big screen, especially with this talent. I think I mentioned it when Wolves released. The preview screenings that were available, I couldn't get into because they'd all sold out within about a minute. So there was an appetite to see these stars and to see this story play out on the big screen. I think whilst Apple are doing a fantastic job with series, and I would say from a content standpoint, the films I've really enjoyed. They've been varied. I know some people didn't like some of the films, like Argyle, which I just had a blast for and enjoyed it as a popcorn movie. There's definitely something that needs to change, and I wonder if Apple know that they can't change the direction in which the industry is going, right? And are having to wait for the industry to pivot and kind of save itself before they can really have an idea as to where to go forward with Apple original films. We got the F1 film coming. I think The Gorge will see a theatrical release, even if it's a limited one. And as I said earlier, Blitz is still in cinemas, at least over here. So that also adds kind of even more of a strange twist to this story. Why it was Wolf's, I think, the only film to really not see any kind of real theatrical release. Yeah, it's disappointing. I do worry about what that means for new talent that are being approached by Apple and new directors. And I do wonder if an easy fix for that is for the directors to say, you know, hey, any project I'm doing, it's got to have a theatrical release, right? It's got to be in there. It can't just be a promise. And I think that will help Apple in the long run. Let's be honest, as much as it has to make business sense, if we're looking in the long term, none of Apple's TV business has really made financial sense yet, right? It's still very much the long play. And I do wonder also if Apple would have got people like Ridley Scott and Martin Scorsese early on, if that were the case. I'd actually be really interested to know what Martin Scorsese's thoughts are on this particular wrangle. Maybe we'll hear some candid thoughts, even if they're scripted, in the studio in March, following a movie executive called Matt. So
yeah, it's an interesting time for Apple and film. I think this particular situation was a miss. Not the right time or way to change your strategy, but we'll continue to keep an eye out and see what kind of moves they make going forward and who they continue to work with. Now, you mentioned Martin Scorsese, and the rumor, at least according to World of Real, is that he'll be returning to Apple TV Plus and working with Apple Studios on his next film, which is an adaptation of Marilyn Robinson's novel Home that will be written by Kent Jones and Todd Field. Casting is currently underway with plans to begin filming early next year. The novel, which is part of a series that World of Real says could continue to be adapted by the team behind Home, follows the Boughton family as siblings Jack and Glory return to live with their Reverend Father after being away for 20 years. So it sounds like Apple's locked down Martin Scorsese's next film. Have to imagine it's going to be theatrical, but it also sounds like this could be the beginning of a series of films that could be really interesting based on this series of books. It sounds like a cool concept to me anyway.
We've heard it before, so let's let's stay quietly positive on that. In terms of casting, Hugo Weaving revealed at the International Film Festival of India that he will return as Frank Harkness in Season 5 of Slow Horses, a fact that I think will surprise no one considering where Season 4 ended. Deadline also reports that Jessica Biel is in talks to star opposite John Cena in an Apple original film Matchbox, based on the iconic toy line from Mattel. One I know you're definitely looking forward to.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, John Cena, Jessica Biel, race cars. What could possibly go wrong? This sounds awesome and could have that family angle as well at the right time for me and my family. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it. In other news, Apple has opened up applications for a new head of global licensing position at Apple TV Plus, potentially hinting at more licensed content coming to the service in the future. Now, of course, Apple TV Plus launched with the all originals approach. We've seen very limited licensing deals coming to the service in the forms of usually either picking up like past seasons or iterations of series, like with the Long Way series or Fraggle Rock, something like that. We've seen that before. And then we saw that really interesting approach where for about 6 months, every month, the service would offer a series of films that sometimes connected to stuff happening on the service. Sometimes it's just like, hey, here's a bunch of movies. And yeah, that ended a few months ago. We haven't seen that continue. And that was also US only. And this is global licensing. So I don't know, maybe that experiment was successful and they're investing in it, or maybe they took some learnings from that and have decided they want to get one dedicated person really thinking about that. But either way, we could be seeing more licensed content come to the service in some form if this hiring goes well.
I mean, right now, all of the originals, I think, apart from maybe a couple of exceptions, have been available to everyone, right? Whether you subscribed in Spain or the UK or the US or Argentina, I don't know, I'm pulling them out of a rabbit's hat right now. You were able to watch the same films and same series day and date. I wonder if that is a limiting factor at all for Apple and not being able to get some deals done, especially with, you know, their studio partners like Paramount and Warner Brothers and Sony. And so I wonder if that might be a way of filling the gap and not having these all-encompassing deals. That was my kind of first thought with regard to this, because I think straying too far away from the all-original prospect of Apple TV Plus is just going to add some more confusion. And I don't think that's something that Apple can really afford to do at this point. I also think it's interesting that this is the reverse of some reporting that came out last week with regard to Apple looking to sell on their films and TV series to possibly third-party services, right? Which is something that is happening throughout the industry. And actually, not anything new, because we were talking about this at the beginning of the year with Fifth Season and what they were doing for the likes of C and the first season of Severance and putting those up for auction alongside Truth Be Told and other series. So this is a really interesting position, and it's going to be interesting to see how both sides kind of even out.
Yeah, I mean, we're in the waning days probably of the streaming wars and kind of figuring out what exactly the streaming landscape is going to look like as things start to settle. And I think this is another element of that, as far as just what the future looks like is not hanging on to every bit of content. And my worry with this, or my, I guess, caution, concern, whatever you want to call it, is Apple TV Plus has an identity right now. An Apple original, that label means something. And so what you don't want is just Apple to buy a bunch of library content and kind of mix it all up. And so I'm open to the idea of licensing as a way to maybe get some people in, but I'm more open to licensing out than licensing in. So that's what I'd like to see, and we'll see what happens. But yeah, it's the streaming landscape is just such a weird place right now, and everyone's trying to figure out how to make the money work. That's kind of where all these services are at. And I think that's probably what this is. It's more of an exploratory thing than anything else, and just kind of trying to keep up with the rest of the industry rather than falling behind and missing out on an opportunity to find new subscribers and growth that way.
Another way for Apple to find new subscribers is, of course, when your titles are up for awards. And as with every week, I think, now running up all the way through to award season, we're going to have news of different nominations and different wins. But we start our Apple FYC segment this week at the International Emmy Awards, with Best Drama Series going to Drops of God. Then, followed on from that, the 2024 Hollywood Music and Media Awards saw 2 wins. One for main title of a TV show limited series for Blake Neely's score of Masters of the Air. And then we saw Best Score for a TV show or limited series in a foreign language go to Los Azules' Women in Blue, beautifully put together from Lucas Vidal. In terms of nominations, the AARP, the Magazine Movies for Grown-Ups nominations, a mouthful but pretty prestigious, saw nominations for Best Actress in TV for Jennifer Aniston, The Morning Show, and Best Actor in TV for Billy Crudup of The Morning Show, Idris Elba of Hijack, and Gary Oldman in Slow Horses. And finally, Best TV Series or Limited Series nominations for Palm Royale and Slow Horses. Winners announced January 11th. Finally, for this week's awards news, the Academy Awards are slowly opening up their eligibility lists for different categories of film. This week, opening up the eligibility list for documentary feature, in which Bread and Roses, Girls' State, and The Last of the Sea Women are taking shape to be contenders.
Very cool. Well, that's a lot of FYC news for Apple Originals this week. Congratulations to all the winners and nominees, and of course, best of luck to those 3 documentaries as we continue to get closer and closer to the Academy Awards shortlists, and then nominees, and then the awards, the whole process. But we'll be keeping track and seeing how these 3 fare as it goes on.
Well, that's all the news for Apple Originals in the 2-dimension. It's time to talk some immersive, because as we have had over the last month or so, and will continue to have throughout December and January, we have yet another Apple immersive video experience this past week, with the singer-songwriter RAYE being the first in a new series called Concert for One, where she sung her hits Genesis and Escapism from Air Studios in London in what I've seen described as a captivating and intimate set. I'll be honest, I have not yet had a chance. I was hoping to before we were recording, so maybe some added thoughts next week on the podcast. But Devon, you had a chance to check this out, and well, is it more of the same, or is there something quite exceptional about this, based on what we saw previously with The Weeknd and way before with Alicia Keys?
I will say, in terms of format, this is very, very similar to what we got with Alicia Keys. You're in the room with the singer and the band. It's a little bit more fixed perspective. There's not as much camera cutting. There's a little bit of camera cutting and movement, but for the most part, it's very similar to the Alicia Keys experience, where you're sitting there watching and the singer is singing directly to you. So I'll say that's a little bit of a mixed experience for me personally, but I want to start by just saying that this was a stellar performance by RAYE and team. I'm not familiar with RAYE's work personally. This was my first exposure to her, which a great introduction to her music and her performance style. She was very engaging, and obviously a very talented singer with a great team of artists and performers to go along with her. I want to give a particular shout out to a guitar tech who literally had to stand in the background of the entire video, try to stay out of the way, and just kind of bob along to the music just to swap out a guitar between songs. Those guitar techs, they don't get a lot of recognition, but there was nowhere to hide in this video. You couldn't go backstage. So literally they're just standing back there bobbing to the music. And that person, the MVP for me of the video, look out for them when you watch it. It's great. But yeah, RAYE did a great job. I enjoyed the music very much. And in terms of the performance, I thought it was very engaging. But the format, I think for me, is what felt a little bit samey in comparison to what we've seen before. And I don't mean to be negative for people who haven't experienced Alicia Keys or haven't experienced immersive video before. This would be, eye-opening. But as someone who's very much in the bubble, who watches all of this the second it comes out, for me, I feel like we've established the format pretty well, and I'd like to see it continue to be explored. There's elements here that we've certainly seen before. It opens with that very close-up shot on RAYE's face that, it's kind of become like a staple of immersive video. And I'll have to say, after seeing it this many times, it doesn't have that striking effect on me anymore that it would on a first-time viewer. But again, that could be my bias as someone who's just, a little bit too immersed in this world. But personally, those close-up shots are getting a little bit uncomfortable for me. In terms of, if you imagine you're actually standing in the room with RAYE and you're that close to see her that close, it's really intimate how little personal space there is there.
That's something I wanted to ask, because I remember my first experience with Apple Vision Pro in a demo and getting that short clip of Alicia Keys during that demo. and feeling a little bit like, wow, this is amazing, but this is really awkward because she's singing in my face. And if you've ever experienced a night out where someone's had maybe one too many and thinks they can sing, it kind of evokes part of that feeling alongside the amazement. Is there more of that in this?
I would say so. I mean, the title's Concert for One, right? It's for you specifically, which is great. But it is a little bit awkward feeling like you're the only one being sung to. And there's also an element to it that feels a little bit isolating. It's cool. You feel like you're in the room with this band, and they're performing for you. But honestly, what I would have preferred is like to maybe be sitting in a crowd, either in front of a stage or in the room. And the room's fine. But to feel like it was not just me there, I think that would have been an enhancement to the experience.
The recent NBA Immersive video was, I think, a prime example of how an experience like that really works. Beyond the amazing athleticism that's on display in that short video, something that I mentioned after my preview and something that really sticks with me each time I played back that immersive video is looking to the side of me and seeing people in the crowd and how they're reacting alongside me, which is something you do in real life. So yeah, I 100% agree. An audience in the next Concert for One, pretty please.
Yeah, that would be great. I got into it as it went along and kind of, you get absorbed and you just kind of accept whatever the conceit is of what you're watching. The second song, it felt like it relied less on some of those immersive video staples that we've come to expect. It really was just her performing and more focused on her stage presence and her vocal ability as well. And so the second song felt more concert-like, and that to me was a better experience than feeling like I'm being sung to personally. But I mean, I enjoyed it, and if we could get a crowd in there, I think that would kind of perfect it for me. But regardless, if you have a Vision Pro and you haven't checked it out, it's worth watching and experiencing RAYE in this new immersive format, which is available now on the TV app on Apple Vision Pro.
Other TV releases this week, Devon. Today, we have a bumper crop of episodes due to Thanksgiving. As has become tradition, we have new episodes of Bad Sisters, Shrinking, You Would Do It Too, Silo, and Before, so the perfect recipe for a binge. And then you've got to wait all the way until Saturday and Sunday, but at the end of that wait is something quite spectacular. The MOS Conference Finals on MOS Season Pass, Orlando versus New York, and LA v Seattle. And at this point, I think we need to kind of look back on our picks this season and see who kind of won overall.
Yeah, well, both of our teams made it to the playoffs, which is great. Miami, looking at how far they came, I think they got knocked out 2 rounds ago. And then Minnesota got knocked out last week. So my team made it a little bit further. Neither team quite made it all the way. But I'll collect the point this time with my team making it further, and we'll see what happens next season. Now, I think I'm obligated to root for Los Angeles throughout the rest of the tournament because they're the ones who knocked out Minnesota. So I want to believe that loss was for something. So at least we could say we lost to the winning team. But regardless, 3 more games in the MLS season. It's kind of wild that it's already almost over, but definitely check those out on MLS Season Pass.
Devon wins at sports. Who would have had that on their 2024 bingo card? Anyway, we also got some extras this week. One that really I found incredibly touching. Stories from World War II Blitz survivors in London, told to Benjamin Clementine, Steve McQueen, Saoirse Ronan, and Elliot Heffernan, who asks some amazing questions. Such a young, brilliant talent. Cannot wait to see more from him. We also saw the release this week of the Bad Sisters Season 2 soundtrack on Apple Music. Very, very cool to see. And speaking of Apple Music, we also got the Best of 2024 featuring an Artist of the Year, the first 2-time Artist of the Year. Would you like to do the honours, Devon?
I will. Billie Eilish, congratulations for winning 2 Apple Music Artist of the Year awards. That's incredible, especially for such a young artist. Really impressive, but also so well deserved. So they've got lots of editorial content in the Apple Music app on her career, the year that she's had, as well as many best of playlists. So we'll link to those in the show notes. Be sure to check them out.
Also, before I get to my TV app highlights this week, one Apple Music highlight, Kendrick Lamar just dropped an album out of nowhere last weekend, GNX. It is incredible. Highly, highly recommend checking it out and adding it to your library on the service. Squabble up indeed. In terms of TV app highlights this week, now streaming Dear Santa, or is that Satan, on Paramount Plus. A fun family comedy about a likeable 6th grader, Liam, who writes to Santa asking him to prove that he's real. But Liam is dyslexic and accidentally sends his letter to Satan instead, who shows up at Liam's house excited to have his first fanboy letter and wanting a little of Liam's soul. It's a Farrelly Brothers comedy, so you kind of know what to expect there, with Jack Black as Santa. Or is that Satan? We also see the PVOD release of Conclave. This is Edward Berger of Submerged fame. His new feature film, a thriller which follows the unexpected death of the Pope, with Cardinal Lawrence tasked with managing the covert and ancient ritual of electing a new one. But Lawrence soon finds himself at the centre of a conspiracy that could lead to the Vatican's downfall. It stars Ralph Fiennes in the leading role, supported by a cast that includes Apple original alumni in John Lithgow and Stanley Tucci, and cinematography from the brilliant Stéphane Fontaine. So highly, highly recommended there. Some other highlights from the animated realm. We have Memoir of a Snail on PVOD, which just looks fantastic. Beautiful stop animation. And Robot Dreams, which is an animated film that picked up, I think, Best Short Animated Film at last year's Academy Awards. That is now available on Hulu, and it's very, very silly and very, very funny, and has such a touching ending. So highly recommend there. Friday sees the return of none other than Ben Stiller in Nutcrackers on Hulu. This is Ben Stiller as Mike. On the heels of closing his biggest deal of his career, he's pulled away from his bachelor life in the big city to a farm in rural Ohio in order to help his recently orphaned nephews find a new home. This is a holiday film from David Gordon Green, and again, starring Ben Stiller, who, I can't believe this, but in fact, this is his first lead role in 7 years. Now, the trailer looks fantastic. The kids in this look like they're set to steal the show, though. So, yeah, very much looking forward to a little bit of Ben Stiller on screen ahead of his directorial work with the 2nd season of Severance in January. We also have, on Friday, Senna on Netflix, which is a series based on the life of Ayrton Senna, the late great Formula One driver. And on Sunday, we see Last Summer on the Criterion Channel. Despite the cover of this is actually a harrowing account of a French teenager who, after living with his mother in the city, moves in with his estranged father's family in the countryside, where he clashes with his stepmother. It's directed by Catherine Breillat. The film won 4 Caesar Award nominations earlier this year. I've seen it already, and it is fantastic. One of the picks from the London Film Festival and one of the surprise late editions. Highly recommended there. And lastly, I feel like we have to mention it because first off, it's Star Wars. And second off, it's from John Watts, who we've spoken about, the director of Wolves. This is Star Wars Skeleton Crew, a new kids' adventure Star Wars series. I'll be honest, I've been kind of put off recently by the Star Wars output from Disney when it comes to the original series. Just felt like it was oversaturated with not a lot new going on. I'm sure will vehemently disagree with me, but this definitely sparks my interest given the young cast involved and that kind of adventure series like Goonies meets Star Wars is what I'm getting. I could be wrong, but yeah, definitely one I want to check out.
Yeah, that's the vibe I'm getting as well, and I think it's going to be an awesome addition to the Star Wars universe. Of course, also stars Jude Law. I think he's going to be like the mentor, adult in the room type thing. So I'm really looking forward to this one on Disney Plus next week. Now, before we get to our up next picks for the episode, of course, this Friday is Black Friday. There's sales everywhere. I'm sure you've heard about them. We have a full holiday gift guide up on macstories.net of gifts that you can give to the Apple nerd in your life, as well as a list from Amazon of some of the best tech deals for Black Friday as well. So check those out, but we thought we would share each one Black Friday deal that we thought listeners might be interested in taking advantage of. Sigmund, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I'm just going to say it out loud and proud. The Raspberry Pi. It is a computer that was originally made for education, but quickly, of course, gained a reputation as the best budget-conscious, low-powered tinkering computer ever created. And you can do so much with these little, credit card-sized computers. You can go as wild as you really want to. And I'm using this in a Home Assistant setup because I think it's better to have Home Assistant running on a dedicated computer rather than a computer like a Mac that also needs its own software updates and can mess things up. And, you know, once Apple Home kind of catches up on things, there's so many different use cases for the Raspberry Pi should you never need to use Home Assistant again, and you know, could even act as a great first computer for young people that you love in your life and could really get the ball rolling on the next best app and innovation coming from the next generation. So yeah, the Raspberry Pi, I just think it's a fantastic pick. Again, there's lots of different SKUs and variants that you can get, so you can pick them up pretty cheap, but also you can spend a fair bit of money on them as well, as and when you need to.
Yeah, the Raspberry Pi is a world that I haven't entered yet because I'm kind of scared of how deep I'll go down the rabbit hole, but like you said, you can get in pretty cheap and do some really awesome things with it. So a great recommendation and something I think a lot of people would enjoy as a Christmas gift. I'm going to stick with the smart home kind of theme that you started, and I'm going to pick the Nanoleaf Essential Smart LED color changing light bulbs. I put these in every lamp in my house, and I love them because you can change the brightness, the color temperature, and of course the hue. And it's just a really fun and easy way to change up your house, to get things smart and automated so that you don't have to be dealing with light switches and flipping switches on lamps. You can just get all that to work the way you want it to. And then when it's TV time, you can always set the mood exactly the way you want and, even color code to whatever it is that you're watching if that's what you want to do. So these are pretty inexpensive bulbs. They're $15 each. You get a 4-pack for $40 right now, which is a great deal. I'd recommend buying a 4-pack, just throwing them in the lamps in your living room, your media room, wherever it is, and just try them out. They're a lot of fun, and if you have someone in your life who is into smart home stuff or interested in smart home stuff, this is also just a great entry point.
A dim lit movie time, a man after my heart, Devon. I love replicating the theatrical experience at home that way. And that ties in with the first Up Next pick this week to close out this episode. This is actually a film that I recommended to you after seeing it this weekend, which I think was a surprise because I'm not someone that normally goes to see a musical. And actually, the films that I wanted to see at cinema weren't playing. So I was like, oh, okay, let's give this a spin. And wow. Was I right in that message that I think you're pulling up right now?
You were absolutely right, Sigmund. It's funny that you know me so well. I can't resist a good musical. And Wicked, which came out this past week in theaters. This is Wicked Part 1. It's the first act of the show in film form, with the second part coming next year from director John M. Chu. And this was really special for me. First of all, I love Wicked. I've seen it at least twice live, maybe more than that. And then just being a theater kid growing up, Wicked is like, it's S-tier status in terms of musicals. And it's one that I've always wanted to see adapted to film so more people could experience it, because as much as it tours and is available in so many places, that theatrical experience just isn't always available to people, whereas movie theaters are a lot easier to get to. Now, for me, getting to the movie theater has not been easy over the past, year and some change. So this was actually my first time getting a babysitter and my wife and I going to the movies, just the two of us, since our son was born. So it was also special in that sense that we got to do that together, and it took something really special to, get us out of the house. But this film is incredible. Of course, it stars Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande, who are just an incredible pair and really do bring justice to these roles that are so iconic in the lore of musicals. And I won't say too much about it, but it's a really great story, of course, about the Wicked Witch of the West from Wizard of Oz, her backstory, the question of, where did that wickedness come from? How did she end up there? And the relationships that led her there along the way. Some amazing music. As a fan of the stage show, I had no idea how they were going to match the just incredible climax of the end of the first act, that final musical number, Defying Gravity. When you see it live and the lights go down, your heart is just racing. There's tears in your eyes. There's chills on your arm. And I wasn't sure how they were going to replicate that on the film, but they did. And chills all over my body as that film was ending. I think part of what the film does so well is it doesn't rely too much on filmmaking techniques as much as the theatrical techniques. Now, of course, there's special effects and camera moves and all that, but you can feel the theatrical heritage in every scene, and it really comes through.
Yeah, there's a physicality, right?
Yes.
That you get on the stage that you never really get when a stage musical is brought to the screen. I felt that for the first time in this modern era when we watched Schmigadoon. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I've got to contrast this with. Of course, Shu's last film, which was also a musical, was In the Heights,
yes,
which was released during, just after the pandemic, when the cinemas hadn't really got into full force. People were still a bit iffy on going, and of course that released at the same time on streaming. So it's great to see his next project get this support and the success. Mm-hmm. It really was something else. I wasn't expected to be taken in like I was, and by the end of it, I normally kind of look at people weird when they applaud at the end of a film that isn't a premiere or something like that, and I really wanted to, but no one else was, and that really made me sad. So fantastic. Wicked in theaters, available to pre-order already in the TV app for watching at home, I'd imagine right at the beginning of next year. My up next pick this week is actually a show that we highlighted last week in our TV app highlights for the week, and that is A Man on the Inside on Netflix. This is Ted Danson in comedy perfection, I'm going to call it. A really sweet series about a recently widowed man who is hired to become an investigator and investigate the goings on in an old people's home. And it's just a really beautiful, sweet show that I can just relax to and watch. And it really focuses on some of the subtle nuances of growing old and of those that are caring for people that are in that stage of their life as well. There are a number of things that happen, like a watch goes missing, but actually it's just fallen off someone's wrist, and there's accusations being flown about, and this is like a daily occurrence for me in my life with my grandparents. But it's treated in such a mindful way, and really gives dignity to people in that age, which unfortunately in this day and age we see less and less of. So yeah, just a beautiful show, perfect watch for the whole family, and one that I couldn't recommend highly enough. Ted Danson at his greatest.
Wow, that's high praise. Ted Danson, a performer that I'm a huge fan of, so this is definitely going on my list of things to watch over the Thanksgiving break. Well, that's all from us this week. Thank you so much for listening. Of course, episode 150 is coming up very, very soon. We've got just a few weeks before that big episode, and we want to commemorate it with a Q&A with questions from you. So send us your questions to magic@macstories.net. You can write those out, or you can send it as a voice memo. Either way, we'd love to hear what you'd like us to answer as we celebrate another milestone for Magic Rays of Light. Of course, you can contact us on social media via the links in the show notes. You can email the show or send us an iMessage to magic@macstories.net. We would love to hear from you.
As always, thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with a look back at Where's Wonder and Midnight Family, as well as all of the goings on in the world of Apple TV. So until then, stay safe, watch some Apple TV, play some Apple Arcade, and have a great week. And for those celebrating, happy Thanksgiving. Don't eat too much.